A black construction worker, faced with discrimination and ridicule at a high-end real estate agency, was able to turn the situation around. Who he really turned out to be silenced everyone and completely changed their perceptions. Where are you watching from? Write in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss other interesting stories. James Robinson grew up in a small, dilapidated house on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. It was a home in name only, barely insulated in the winters, stiflingly hot in the summers, and perpetually in need of repair. The roof leaked when it rained, and the creaking floors bore witness to generations of struggle. For James and his 6 siblings, life was a constant tug-of-war between hope and hardship. His mother, a nurse who often worked double shifts, was the backbone of the family, while his father, a carpenter, did odd jobs to put food on the table. Despite their struggles, James's parents instilled in him the values of perseverance and compassion. His mother, ever the optimist, would remind him after particularly long days, "No matter how hard things get, remember that helping others makes you strong." His father, a man of few words but endless wisdom, would quietly pass on lessons through his work, showing James how to repair a chair or build a table from scratch. "If you can make something with your hands," he once told him, "you'll never go hungry." School was no easier for James. Being one of the few black students in his predominantly white school meant he was constantly battling prejudice, both overt and subtle. Teachers often dismissed his potential, while classmates excluded him from activities, assuming he wasn't one of them. James quickly learned to channel his frustration into focus, excelling in subjects like math and science. When he wasn't studying, he was helping his father with carpentry projects, learning the value of hard work long before his peers understood what responsibility truly meant. By the time James turned 18, he knew 2 things for certain. He didn't want to follow the exact same path as his parents, and he wanted to build a life where he could help others escape the cycle of poverty that had gripped his family for generations. But with no money for college and few job opportunities, James took the only option available. He became a construction worker. At first, the work was grueling and thankless. Days began before dawn and ended after the sun had set, leaving James exhausted and covered in dust. His co-workers were a mix of seasoned laborers and younger men like himself, all struggling to make ends meet. The older workers taught him the tricks of the trade: how to properly pour concrete, how to read blueprints, and, most importantly, how to stay safe in an environment where one wrong move could mean disaster. James quickly gained a reputation as a hard worker. He was the first to arrive at the site and the last to leave, always eager to learn. He saved every spare dollar, often skipping meals to add to his savings. When he wasn't working, he was reading books on construction management, sketching out ideas for projects he dreamed of building one day. His determination paid off when, at the age of 25, he was offered a supervisor role on a large project, a new housing complex in a nearby city. It was a turning point in his life. The role came with more responsibility, but it also offered a glimpse of what could be possible if he worked even harder. Over the next several years, James moved from project to project, climbing the ranks with each step. By 30, he had saved enough to start his own small construction company. Running his own business was no small feat. James faced challenges at every turn. Banks were hesitant to give him loans, suppliers charged him higher rates than they did his white competitors, and potential clients often questioned his qualifications solely based on his appearance. Yet James persisted. He took on jobs that others overlooked, often working late into the night to ensure deadlines were met. His company slowly grew, earning a reputation for high-quality work and fair treatment of employees. By the time James was 40, he had become a shareholder in one of the largest construction firms in the region. But, despite his success, he never lost touch with his roots. He continued to work on site alongside his crews, wearing the same dusty boots and hard hat he'd started with. For James, staying connected to the work reminded him of why he started in the first place: to create opportunities for others, just as he had once dreamed of for himself. It was during one of these long days on the job site that the idea for the charity center struck him. One of his workers, a young man named Marcus, had come to him asking for an advance on his paycheck. Marcus explained that he had recently lost his apartment and was living out of his car while trying to support his 2 children. The story hit James hard. He had seen too many talented, hard-working people like Marcus fall through the cracks, victims of a system that seemed designed to keep them down. James couldn't stop thinking about how he could help people like Marcus on a larger scale. That evening, he sat down with a notepad and began outlining his vision for a center that would provide housing, job training, and resources for those in need. The center would be more than just a shelter. It would be a stepping stone, a place where people could regain their footing and build a better future. He began searching for properties the very next day. His requirements were specific. The space needed to be large enough to accommodate housing, classrooms, and recreational areas, while also being close to public transportation and job opportunities. After weeks of searching, he found it: a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city. The property was perfect, with its vast grounds and sturdy buildings that could be easily renovated to fit his vision. It was also expensive, but James had been saving for years and was ready to invest his own money to make the dream a reality. Without hesitation, he called the listed real estate agency to set up a meeting. The next morning, he left the construction site early and drove straight to the agency. He didn't bother changing out of his work clothes. He figured that his passion and resources would speak for themselves. Little did he know, the reception he would receive at the agency would test everything he believed about perseverance and prejudice. The air in the real estate agency was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint, sterile aroma of polished wood. The walls were adorned with framed photographs of luxurious estates and sprawling mansions, each one a testament to excess and affluence. James Robinson stepped inside, his steel-toed boots clinking softly against the marble floor. The room went momentarily quiet as a few agents glanced up from their desks. Their eyes swept over him quickly, as if processing whether he was a client or someone who had wandered in by mistake. James, unfazed by the subtle stares, walked directly to the front desk. His clothes, still dusty from the construction site, bore the marks of honest labor: a high-visibility vest, faded jeans, and a work-worn jacket. The receptionist, a young woman with a neatly pressed blazer, forced a polite smile. She blinked at him, clearly unsure how to proceed. Before James could say a word, her eyes darted toward another employee, silently signaling for backup. Moments later, a tall man in a sleek, tailored suit approached. His perfectly styled hair and polished demeanor screamed professionalism, but the faint twitch of his lips betrayed his uncertainty. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone measured and polite, but tinged with an undertone that James had learned to recognize over the years: disbelief. James explained that he was interested in purchasing an estate. He gave the name of the property he had seen listed, detailing his plans for transforming it into a charitable center. The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as James spoke, his polite smile tightening into something less genuine. "We can certainly discuss that," the man replied, gesturing toward a seating area. "But let me ask, are you sure this is the type of property you're looking for? It's quite substantial." James didn't miss the hesitation in the man's voice. It was the same tone he had encountered countless times before. People trying to measure his worth based on his appearance. He sat down anyway, determined to stay focused on his goal. The agent joined him, opening a sleek tablet and pulling up images of the estate. James listened patiently as the man described its features, but he could feel the weight of the agent's skepticism pressing down on the conversation. When the discussion turned to the property's price, the man paused meaningfully, as if expecting James to back out. Instead, James nodded thoughtfully, asking about the specifics of the transaction process. The agent's eyes narrowed slightly, his smile now a thin veneer of professionalism. As the conversation continued, it became clear to James that the agent wasn't taking him seriously. Questions were deflected, important details glossed over. The agent even suggested that James might be interested in other properties, pulling up smaller, less impressive listings. James's patience began to wear thin, but he kept his composure. He was used to being underestimated, and he had no intention of letting this man's condescension derail his plans. The turning point came when the manager of the agency, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense air, approached. She introduced herself with a firm handshake, her eyes flicking briefly to James's boots before settling on his face. Her smile was cordial, but the slight arch of her eyebrows suggested skepticism. The manager took over the conversation, addressing James in the same overly polite tone as the agent. She began to ask probing questions, not about the property, but about James himself. What did he do for a living? Was he aware of the estate's maintenance costs? Did he have proof of financing? Each question felt less like a formality and more like a thinly veiled challenge to his legitimacy. James calmly answered each one, explaining his role as an investor and business owner. But the more he spoke, the more dismissive the manager became. She interrupted him frequently, steering the conversation back to why the estate might not be a good fit. "It's a significant investment," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We usually deal with a particular kind of client for properties like this." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. James felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in his chest. He had seen this before. The sideways glances, the thinly veiled doubt. It was the same prejudice that had followed him since he was a boy, the same bias that told him he didn't belong in certain spaces. But James wasn't here to argue or defend himself. He was here to make a purchase that would change lives. Keeping his voice steady, he reiterated his interest in the estate and asked to move forward with the process. The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She exchanged a glance with the agent, who gave a small shrug. "Well," she said finally, "these things take time. Perhaps we can start with a consultation to discuss more realistic options." The words hit James harder than he expected. Realistic options. As if the idea of him purchasing the estate was inherently absurd. He sat silently for a moment, weighing his response. He had come here with the intention of discussing logistics and plans, but it was clear that no matter what he said, these people had already made up their minds about him. The room had grown quieter as other employees and clients began to take notice of the exchange. James could feel their eyes on him, their whispers just barely audible. For a brief moment, he considered walking away. It would have been easier, less exhausting, to let their ignorance stand unchallenged. But James knew that walking away wouldn't change anything. If he wanted to create the world he envisioned, he couldn't let this go unanswered. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just going to prove them wrong. He was going to ensure that no one else had to face this kind of treatment again. The manager's condescending smile faltered slightly as James leaned forward, ready to speak his truth. The air was thick with tension as James sat across from the manager, her condescending smile still fixed in place, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The agent, who had initially greeted James with feigned politeness, now shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to navigate the situation. Around them, the agency's sleek, modern interior buzzed with muted conversations, but James could sense that more than a few employees and clients had their attention firmly fixed on the unfolding interaction. James leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but firm. He had no intention of raising his voice or letting frustration cloud his judgment. Instead, he spoke clearly, introducing himself fully for the first time. He explained that he was not just a construction worker, but a shareholder in one of the largest construction companies in the region. He detailed the projects he had overseen, from residential developments to sprawling commercial complexes, and the thousands of jobs his company had created over the years. He didn't stop there. James described the purpose behind his interest in the estate, painting a vivid picture of the charitable center he envisioned. He explained how it would provide housing, job training, and resources for people struggling to get back on their feet. His words carried the weight of personal experience. He spoke of the hardships he had faced growing up, the systemic barriers he had overcome, and his unwavering belief in the power of community. The agent's face turned pale as realization dawned. The man they had dismissed as a dusty, underdressed laborer was, in fact, one of the most successful and influential figures in the region's construction industry. The manager, too, seemed momentarily stunned, though she quickly tried to recover, offering a strained smile and an awkward apology. But James wasn't finished. He addressed the manager directly, his voice steady but laced with quiet intensity. He pointed out the microaggressions he had endured since stepping into the agency. The skeptical glances, the dismissive comments, the assumption that he couldn't possibly afford the property. He made it clear that their behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was discriminatory. By now, the room had fallen almost completely silent. Employees who had previously been focused on their work were now openly listening, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. The weight of James's words hung in the air, undeniable and unignorable. To drive his point home, James reached for his phone and dialed a number. On the other end was his attorney, a sharp and capable woman who had represented him for years. He calmly explained the situation, outlining the agency's treatment of him and their thinly veiled bias. His voice remained measured, but his words carried an unyielding resolve. The manager's face reddened as she realized the gravity of the situation. She stammered an apology, insisting that there must have been a misunderstanding, but James wasn't interested in excuses. He stated plainly that he would not tolerate such behavior and that changes needed to be made, not just for him, but for any future clients who might face similar treatment. At that moment, the agency's director entered the room, having been summoned by one of the employees. The director, a middle-aged man with a composed demeanor, quickly assessed the situation. He approached James with an outstretched hand, introducing himself and apologizing profusely for what had transpired. James listened, but he remained firm in his stance. He made it clear that apologies were not enough. He demanded accountability. specifically the immediate dismissal of the manager and agent who had treated him with such blatant disrespect. He also insisted that the agency implement mandatory training for all employees on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The director hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the confrontation, but James's unflinching gaze left no room for negotiation. After a tense pause, the director nodded, agreeing to James's terms. The manager and agent were visibly shaken as they were asked to step aside, their faces a mixture of shock and humiliation. As the director assured James that his concerns would be addressed and that the agency would do better moving forward, James made it clear that he would not be purchasing the property through their firm. He had no interest in rewarding an organization that had treated him so poorly. Instead, he would take his business elsewhere, a statement that drew murmurs from the onlookers, many of whom now looked at James with a newfound respect. Before leaving, James addressed the room as a whole. He spoke not out of anger, but out of a desire to educate. He reminded everyone present that judging someone based on their appearance or background was not only wrong, but also a missed opportunity to connect with individuals who could bring incredible value and insight. His words resonated deeply, leaving many in the room visibly moved. As James walked out of the agency, the tension that had filled the space began to dissipate, replaced by a palpable sense of reflection. Employees exchanged quiet, thoughtful glances, and the director wasted no time in calling a meeting to discuss immediate changes to their practices. For James, the encounter was more than just a personal victory. It was a step toward creating a world where no one would have to endure the kind of prejudice he had faced. And though the experience had been draining, he knew it was necessary. The fight against discrimination wasn't won in a single day or a single interaction. It was a continuous effort, one that required courage, resilience, and unwavering determination. James left the agency with his head held high, ready to continue his journey. He had stood his ground, demanded accountability, and planted a seed of change. Now it was time to focus on what truly mattered, turning his vision of a charitable center into a reality. James Robinson left the real estate agency with a sense of both resolve and exhaustion. The confrontation had been draining, but it was necessary. As he stepped into his truck and started the engine, he looked at the small notepad on the passenger seat where he had scribbled his vision for the charitable center. This dream, born from years of witnessing the struggles of hard-working people like Marcus and himself, was worth every ounce of energy he had expended. His focus shifted back to the goal, securing the perfect property to make that vision a reality. The very next day, James reached out to another real estate agency, a smaller firm with a reputation for integrity and excellent service. The difference in treatment was immediately apparent. The agents were attentive, respectful, and genuinely interested in helping him find the best fit for his needs. Within days, James was touring the sprawling estate he had set his heart on. The property was even more impressive in person, a grand main building surrounded by acres of lush greenery with additional structures that could easily be converted into housing, classrooms, and recreational spaces. James wasted no time. After consulting with his legal and financial teams, he finalized the purchase. This time the process was seamless, a stark contrast to the hurdles he had faced at the first agency. As he signed the final paperwork, he felt a surge of pride, not for the acquisition itself, but for what it represented. This wasn't just a piece of real estate, it was a foundation for change. With the property secured, James assembled a team to begin renovations. Architects, contractors, and community leaders came together to bring his vision to life. The project quickly gained momentum, with workers transforming the estate into a haven for those in need. Dormitories were built to house families, classrooms equipped with state-of-the-art technology were installed for job training programs, and a large communal dining hall was designed to serve free meals daily. Outdoor spaces were developed into gardens and recreational areas, providing a peaceful environment for healing and growth. Word of the project spread throughout the community, attracting volunteers, donations, and support from local businesses. James made it a point to involve the people who would benefit most from the center, inviting them to contribute ideas and share their needs. This collaborative approach not only ensured that the center would address real challenges, but also gave the community a sense of ownership and pride in the project. Months passed, and the grand opening of the Robinson Community Center finally arrived. The event drew a diverse crowd, families who had once struggled to make ends meet, local leaders who had supported the initiative, and even some of James's former colleagues from his early days in construction. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation as people explored the beautifully renovated property, marveling at the transformation. James stood on a makeshift stage in front of the main building, looking out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces, workers from his construction sites, friends who had stood by him through thick and thin, and people whose lives had already been touched by the center. When the time came for him to speak, the crowd fell silent, their attention focused on the man who had made all of this possible. In his speech, James spoke from the heart. He shared his journey, from the challenges of his childhood to the discrimination he had faced just months earlier. He emphasized the importance of resilience, community, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to succeed. He thanked the countless individuals who had contributed to the project, from the construction crews to the volunteers who had worked tirelessly to bring the center to life. Most importantly, he reminded everyone that the center was not about him. It was about them, about creating opportunities and fostering hope for generations to come. As he stepped down from the stage, applause erupted, echoing across the grounds. James was greeted by tearful hugs, heartfelt thanks, and stories from people whose lives had already been changed by the center's programs. Marcus, the worker who had inspired the idea, was there with his children, their smiles a testament to the impact of James's vision. Meanwhile, the fallout from James's earlier encounter with the first real estate agency continued to ripple through the industry. News of their discriminatory treatment had spread, leading to widespread criticism and calls for reform. The agency's leadership was forced to implement diversity training and revamp its hiring practices, while the former manager and agent faced public scrutiny for their actions. Though James took no pleasure in their downfall, he hoped the incident would serve as a lesson and a catalyst for change. Back at the center, James immersed himself in its day-to-day operations. He personally oversaw the programs, ensuring they met the highest standards. He worked alongside the staff, listening to the stories of those who came through the doors. Each success, whether it was a single mother finding stable employment, a homeless veteran securing permanent housing, or a young person gaining new skills, was a reminder of why he had fought so hard to make the center a reality. For James, the center was more than a building or a project. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when people refused to be defined by others' limitations. It was proof that with hard work, determination, and a commitment to doing what was right, even the most entrenched barriers could be overcome. As the sun set on the day of the grand opening, James stood alone on the balcony of the main building, looking out at the bustling activity below. The laughter of children playing in the garden, the hum of conversations in the dining hall, and the sight of people finding solace and support filled him with a quiet sense of fulfillment. He knew that the journey wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more people to help, but for now he allowed himself a moment of peace. James Robinson had turned a vision into reality, proven not only to others but also to himself that success was not about wealth or appearances. It was about the lives you touched and the change you inspired. And as he stood there, watching his dream come to life, he knew that this was only the beginning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring content. Share this video with friends who might love it, and check out our channel for more stories that might spark your interest. See you in the next one.